Okay, we are back.
Yep.
I'm so excited. There's been a lot that has happened if you have lived in South Carolina. So we have a lot to go through, a lot to discuss today. So we'll just start off. It is a chilly day today.
It is chilly. The hoodies are on. Fireplaces kicked on. It's a good time of year
It
though.
is.
Hmm.
I know a lot of people are complaining, but this is where I come alive.
Is it
Sweater weather.
sweater weather?
Yes,
So you're sweater weather.
I love it. Love it.
You
Yes,
have a fireplace in your
I
house?
do.
Have you used it yet?
Yes,
Okay.
last
Is it
night.
gas?
Yes,
Okay.
it's a switch. I've never felt so fancy in my life. I literally just go bloop and it comes on,
Yep.
and it's
Mhm.
yeah, it's life-giving.
Yes, it is. Yep.
It's the best. So, we survived a hurricane.
Yes.
My first hurricane. I don't know if it was yours.
Uh, yeah, for sure. I was out of the
You were out of
country
the
when
country,
it
so you didn't
hit.
experience a lot. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I wasn't there for it, but definitely saw the aftermath.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It was intense. I think we have to say it was really funny because I was calling people and being like, "Yeah, the damage here is crazy. It was pretty scary as we went through it." And they're like, "You're 4 hours from a coast. Like, how is that?
And
Like,
600 miles from the Gulf.
yeah." So,
So
how
yeah.
did that hit you? And then they start to see the pictures of our land and they're like, "Oh, wow, you actually are not lying. You guys
What's
got hit."
interesting too, there's actually quite a few disaster relief organizations that are based in the upstate of South Carolina and up in western North Carolina because it's the least prone to be hit by a natural disaster. And they're close to natural disaster. So there's a lot of headquarters in
Wow.
this region for that very reason. And yeah,
And then
so
we get hit.
that's how kind of a freak
I had no
storm
idea.
that hit this area. Yeah, so some of the main headquarters, they got hit.
Yeah.
So anyway, it's really very traumatic,
Yes.
very devastating.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, so
I
yeah, we a hurricane just happened.
It did. And it was so I'm from Oklahoma. So give me tornadoes all day long. You hide in the middle of your house or you go into a basement and everything will be okay, right? And
Hmm.
this was not the case because these trees here, I guess what people are telling me is that the roots are not very deep.
Hmm.
And so we had a lot of rain before that, and then the winds came through, and it was knocking down these huge trees everywhere. And we could feel the impact of these giant trees in our house. Like the whole house was shaking when they would fall. It was probably the most terrifying thing because you're like, where do you take your kids? This is not, yeah.
Yeah, where do you hide them?
Where do you hide
Where
them?
do you
Yeah.
protect? Yeah.
There's no safety. You don't get in a car. It's weird. Yeah.
Yeah, if you're not from here, just trying to describe the amount of trees, the volume of trees, and the size of them. There's a lot of old trees, and when they come down, I mean, obviously the aftermath.
Yeah.
I've driven around to a lot of the neighborhood trying to look for people that we can help, and a lot of houses are cut in half from these trees.
Yeah.
I
It's,
heard one house, I didn't see it, but three trees just basically on one home. Three
oh,
old oaks just smashed a home.
yeah.
I heard a story where a lady got up to go to the bathroom in the middle of the night, and when she was in the bathroom, came back, a tree had gone right through her bed, so she lived. So it's just the devastation's unreal.
Yeah, I
So
drove by an area the other day and the tree had fallen on the front of the house, so it took off all the front. So it looked like a legitimate like dollhouse. Like you could
you can see all
see
the rooms.
all of the
Wow.
rooms and I was
Mhm.
like, "Wow, that's crazy."
Yeah.
Anyways, the devastation is intense. We obviously didn't get hit as hard as our sisters that are 45 minutes
Yeah.
from us in
That's a whole
Asheville.
nother
That's a
situation.
whole nother
Yeah.
it's still I just want to point that out so that
Hmm.
everyone it listens to this that
Yeah.
it's still
Hmm.
just filled with devastation because I know the news isn't covering that, but it's if you can help. I know that it's getting colder right now, so they're needing blankets
Yeah. It
and
was 38 degrees here last night, so
yeah,
that's going to put them in the low 30s, maybe high 20s.
yeah,
So it's definitely it's uh it's a disaster of epic proportions.
yeah,
Entire little communities and cities were wiped out by the flood. And so, yeah, so it's going to be a long rebuilding process.
yeah,
And so, for anybody out there that wants to help, there's so many different ways to help. There's Samaritan's Purse. There's different churches up in that area doing things.
yeah.
You can give financially through Studio, and that money will all go back up to help. And
That's
so, yeah,
awesome.
so it's going to be a road. It's going to be a journey and a process.
Yeah. A lot of people that I've talked to where I go teach at, they're asking like how they can help. And so one of those things is I'm like, hey, go find the people that are legit and they're actually doing the things. And it's been really cool to see, but the churches
Yeah.
are doing doing the thing, like really legit. I mean, like you can call any church in that area. If they didn't get hit, they're hosting volunteers and free meals, and it's pretty incredible to see the humanity come out.
I just love I just love how the principles of our faith, a part of it comes out in devastations and tragedies.
Yeah.
And that's obviously we don't want any of the tragedies to happen, but it is beautiful to see humanity step up, and obviously to see people in our belief of Christian faith like, oh, we're going to step up even more. So it's really beautiful to see.
Yeah,
Devastating and beautiful.
and the friendships that came out. So I know we were out of power for 9 days, and I know that doesn't sound a lot like that crazy for some people, but for me, that was pretty crazy because those cold showers, and I know I've listened to all of the people that are like, you should cold plunge and you should take cold showers, but when it's forced upon you and it's not chosen thing, it was like a mental battle.
Tough for you.
It was tough,
Yeah.
yeah. But it was beautiful because at night, you're living probably the way that we should be, right? You're living by the sun coming up, you're living by the sun coming down and candles and things like that. So it was really fun. But one night we just set up our outdoor table outside, and we had some friends that made like this giant pasta dish, and we just sat outside in, candlelight a little bit, and it just had dinner, and it was just really fun to
Mm-hmm.
see the creative ways that people were coming together and just hanging out because there was nothing else to do.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah.
I just loved it.
Yeah.
It was also very exposing because you're like, man, you're just sitting there. There's not a lot you can do. And it's like all the internal dialogue starts to come up, and it's real fun.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Yeah.
anyways,
So we're about 2 weeks after,
yeah,
2.5 weeks
yeah,
post Hurricane Helene.
yeah.
And so, yeah, but we're here,
We're here.
and people are being amazing, helping so many people helping people. So
Yeah,
it's really beautiful.
I
Yeah.
love that.
Yep.
So, you and I had a conversation
Yeah.
yesterday. Let's just go there.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it was beautiful. And I just thought, man, a lot of people should hear a little bit about the conversation that we were having and
Yeah.
what does that look like. And it's around emotions. And one of the things that we've been doing as a leadership team, we've been going through a leadership book.
Mm-hmm.
And I got a little frustrated, to be honest, because every time I read a leadership book, it basically tells you to kill your emotions or hide your not hide, but their emotions are just there and they're fine, but don't let them move you and all of the things. And as an artist and someone that wants to grow as a leader, it becomes a little tough for me because I'm like, I am a very emotional person,
Mm-hmm.
and I know that's something I've got to grow in as well. But when you say like, hey, if you're going to be a leader, then what it looks like half the time is that you shouldn't have these emotions. And so I'm wrestling with, what does that look like
Mm-hmm.
to bring out your emotions and still be a good leader? So that's kind of what we're going to talk about.
Yeah.
So,
So it's for me personally, starting so I'm 48 now, so in my early 20s, through a series of people that I knew that were older than me that were mentoring me, I made a commitment at a very, very young age to continually grow as a leader. So for me, it ranges from podcasts, books, hiring leadership coaches, having a leadership coach I meet with once or twice a year or
wow.
every week. I mean, I've just gone to conferences, so my desire to grow as a leader has been there. And so now I can say at this age, been doing that consistently for almost, man, over 20, maybe 30
Wow.
years.
Okay.
And then some of it was driven by the idea, the guy that was mentoring me, he told me, he said 84% of people stop growing when they hit their 30s.
Wow.
They just stop growing. They just kind of and that's who they are. And I remember hearing that in my young 20s thinking, I do not want to be that person.
Yeah.
I want to be someone that's constantly innovating who I am, reinventing myself, growing, expanding. And so I say all that to set the context, but all those years reading so many leadership books, listening to so many different leadership gurus, there was always this part that I always was frustrated with as well. And it was like, whenever it came to the emotional space of a leader, it sounds like to diminish it, don't pay attention to it,
Yeah.
it becomes secondary. So I had a similar frustration all these years. And I'm like, well, I will embrace the part about the leadership principles,
Yeah.
but that part there doesn't resonate. I don't. You're telling me to shut off half of me, and
Yes.
that's impossible.
Yeah.
Now, whether the leadership books and principles actually are saying shut that off, but
Yeah.
that's how it was at least
Exactly.
perceived
Yeah. That's how I
and
perceive it.
heard. So I think one of the dynamics, I know there's people out there that are thinking about like, how come there's not much emphasis on leaders? And so
Yeah.
there's actually a few books and resources out there to actually talk about emotional intelligence. you actually should lead with the intelligence that your emotion provides you.
Yeah.
And so I do think we need to kind of reframe this. And so our conversation, we kind of went into that space
Yeah.
around emotions and around what do we do. I know on this podcast we've talked about we are designed to experience every emotion known to man,
Yeah.
known to humanity. And that means it's a great opportunity to be led, to be discipled, in our case, by Jesus
Yeah.
with all of our emotions. And we have a great place for positive emotions, but
Yes.
we have a really hard time with the ones that are really challenging, negative, or just we don't know how to process it.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, so that's the conversation we want to crack open
Yeah.
today. What's been your journey as of late, or what's your perspective on this in regards to um, what are you learning right now in regards to your emotions and being a leader?
Yeah, so that's been interesting because I've used as a dancer and as a choreographer, I use my emotions when I walk into a room to feel what's happening in the room
Hmm.
and what they're inspired by, how I need to change things up, and so I've used that in that realm so easily.
Hmm.
The hard problem is that I am a very deep feeler,
Hmm.
and so when I walk in, like this, I taught recently at a place and it's a whole different vibe, and I could feel the kids just being really discouraged, and you walk in and you have to combat that. Like I use that, I'm like, oh, I feel that, now I know I need to do this to get them out of it.
Hmm.
So what I find has been tough for me is stepping into the church leadership role
Hmm.
and walking into a room filled with 500, 600 people,
Hmm.
and they're all going through different things, and feeling that room and then not taking that on and thinking that the world is falling apart
Hmm.
like
Yep.
completely.
Hmm.
And that's really tough because you walk in, you're like, oh man, this person is struggling financially and this person's marriage. Okay, yeah. And so you're like feeling all of this. And like, how do you not take all of that on
Hmm.
and feel like, oh, wow, what is the point
Yep.
of leading?
Hmm.
Because we are all just messed up
Yep.
and just tying it all in. And then I think what's hard is that then you see that lens, and then all of a sudden, like, that becomes your very like narrative of like, oh, wow, we are.
It's how you conclude. It's how you say, "Oh, the world is actually like this right now."
Yes, yeah. And so then you have to like pull yourself out of that and say, okay, maybe 10% or 20% are this way, but we still need to go this way, and how to navigate
Mm.
that and pull yourself out has been my journey of
Yeah.
what that looks like.
Yeah, I am in recent time. I'm changing my perspective on emotions, or adding a perspective, and it is my emotions. There's a ton of intelligence and data in it.
Hmm.
So I'm looking at it more like, okay, what is this emotion teaching me, telling me right now?
Yeah.
And so, for example, I shared this recently at studio, like shame and guilt. Within the Christian framework, we use shame and guilt to convince you to get saved or to accept
Ooh,
Jesus.
yeah.
You feel shame and guilt, Jesus is the answer. So and it's true. It's like Jesus will take care of all your shame and all your guilt.
Yes.
So we actually use it to encourage people to come out, go to Jesus. But
Yeah.
the moment you accept Jesus, you're not allowed to talk about it, address it, or even feel it.
Yeah.
The challenge is shame and guilt are actually really intelligent emotion that give you a lot of insight into what's going on in your soul. Now, I will make it very clear: it's not your identity.
Yeah.
It's not your new identity. But we all wrestle with these kinds of emotions often, some more than others. And so I think for me, I'm going, okay, when I feel guilt, I am now getting a sneak peek of what's going on in my soul.
Yeah. That's good.
Now I thankfully have a pathway out of it. So because Jesus is that pathway. So I think there's something around I feel like we should look at our emotions as intelligence and data. It's giving us a sneak peek of what's going on.
Yeah.
The other thing too, I think the soul is also has the ability to be a thermometer and to be a thermostat.
Okay.
So when you just describe you go
Yeah.
into an environment, you feel it's like, okay, you are feeling the temperature of a room. So you're a thermometer.
Yeah.
You're like, oh, it is 72 degrees here, or it's 42, or it's 120.
Yeah.
So you're able to that's the beauty of empathy. Empathy has this amazing power to go, what's going on in this room? Because
Yeah.
you can feel it. You can look at people in their eyes and go, oh wow, I feel this transference
I can
of
feel the tension.
something.
Yeah.
And
So
so,
real.
and that's a really beautiful thing. And I think Jesus was brilliant at this. Jesus clearly recognized what was going on in humanity of his time, whether it's crowds or individuals. He was brilliant at that. And so, in a way, our soul is a thermometer. The challenge is when that thermometer becomes our thermostat.
Yes.
And we go, oh, the room is 72, the room is 110. And so I think that's so as a leader, so now let's put these worlds together.
Yeah.
As a leader, we have to understand, like, am I going to let my empathy, my ability to feel what's going on in people's lives and in a room or individual, am I going to let that determine, yep, this is the world, this is the reality, yep, it's 110 degrees, and there's nothing we can do about it. And so
Yeah.
I think that's where the leadership piece comes in and say, oh no, this is actually really helpful information. Now I need to activate the leader part of me to, okay, how are we going to work through this?
Yeah.
And I don't think the solution is to diminish the emotion and go, well, you know what, it's not important, you shouldn't feel that
Yeah.
way,
We're moving
and
forward.
here's 10 scriptures for it, and you should do this, and we go automatically in that mode. I think those principles are good,
Yeah.
but I think we need to give them a little bit more respect to, okay, we're dealing with fear. There's anxiety.
Yeah.
Okay, now let's talk about how we get through it instead of ignore it and diminish it.
Yeah.
So I think that's where we can, as leaders, can do a better job of recognizing it. But you have to have some ability to master it,
Yeah.
and that's challenging because what we feel is not happening up here. It's not happening in my head.
Yeah.
It's happening so deep in who we are that you're convinced that's how it all is.
Yeah.
And so that's where the leaders, I think the leadership part of us can pop us out of that.
Well, I think it's interesting, like bringing up the empathy thing
Mm-hmm.
is I don't know, and I'm not just going to justify, I think it's humanity. I don't think we do well with sitting with people, though.
Mm-hmm.
And yes, we're so good with you're happy and things are going well. I will high five you and celebrate with you.
Mm-hmm.
But if you're going through something, maybe I'll sit with you for a minute. But then if you're not ready to get out of it by the time I'm ready to get out of it,
Mm-hmm.
then I don't know how to sit with you or even yeah, I don't maybe even don't want to be around you. So I
Mm-hmm.
think we do need to grow in this area
Mm-hmm.
because I feel like what I find hard is especially being when I like confide in people and I'm like, man, this is a really tough situation. And they say, yeah, it's tough, but you know what you should do? And here's your 4 steps to get out of it.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's what's hard because you're like, you might not even know that I know those 4 steps backwards and forwards. I know that eventually I have to take those 4 steps. But right now, I just need people to sit with me and I need people to be real. And so that's what I think I'm missing the most is finding those people that are just that we're willing to sit and
Mm-hmm.
just be like, yeah, that does suck. Like you have been going through a lot.
Mm-hmm.
So I do feel like that's an area that we need to grow in,
Mm-hmm.
especially in the church. So,
Yeah, I think that's where you can let that person know,
yeah.
hey, I want to just share where I'm at. I don't need you to fix it. I don't need you to give me the 4 steps.
Yeah.
Can you just listen?
Yeah.
And sometimes, because my therapist would teach me about emotional bell curves. It's like a bell curve, and up into a certain stage in my life, I thought I was going through the emotion, but when that emotion starts to come up to that peak point, I would finding ways to not experience it anymore. I was ignoring it. I was numbing it. I was denying it. I was doing all these things, and honestly, I legitimately thought I was working through it
Yeah.
and to learn. And it took me to have an emotional mental breakdown to realize, oh, I actually am not going through that emotional bell curve. So we need to develop processes where we all have the ability to go through that emotion. For me, oftentimes just going through that emotion takes care of it.
Yeah.
Like, okay, all right, I went through it, I experienced it, whatever that may be. And we're also taught at a young age which emotions you should feel and shouldn't feel and
Yes,
how you manage
I
them.
was about to ask that.
And so for me, the big emotion that I didn't know how to process for most of my life was anger and sadness.
Ooh.
Like those two, in fact, when they emerged and when my therapist pointed those out, they were like an alien from another planet that I knew other people were familiar with,
Yes.
but I didn't realize I had no concept of how to identify. So I remember this one particular moment. My therapist asked me a question in a session, and only when I know how to describe it, it felt like a monster arose up within me, and I'm like, I don't even know what this is. It caught me so off guard. And I remember saying, I'm done. I can't do this. She said, no, when you talk about that, I said, I cannot talk about this right. It scared me so bad. And she said,
Wow.
can we talk about it next time? I said, absolutely. I can't. I was so foreign. I'm like, I don't even know what this is.
Oh, wow.
I didn't even know. I didn't know I couldn't define it. Well, long story short, I defined like, oh, that was anger.
Wow.
I had actually never learned how to process and walk through anger. Not, not, I mean, not just bail or
Yeah,
ignore it.
yeah.
I knew how to do that,
Yeah.
but actually go through it.
Yeah.
So, of course, the next session, she went right there. And this thing, so for me, those two emotions were like foreign objects that now I had a word like, oh, that's what that is. And so for me, and it's still a journey.
Yeah.
And recognizing anger and sadness, those are the two that were really foreign to me for a majority of my life.
Wow.
And, up until 2018. So that was just 6 years ago.
Dang.
And so now it's a whole different process. And so, and still learning, to be honest
Yeah.
with you, still
Yeah.
learning how to handle and manage these things. So, so I think some of it is there are, I think it wouldn't be an exaggeration. I think each person has a certain emotion they've not been taught or haven't learned how to actually process it.
Yeah.
And so the key is, well, just diminish it, just ignore it, and that honestly it works for some length of time. But my experience, it blew up in my face,
Yeah.
and my whole world came crashing down. And so I had a psychological, emotional break, and I was out. And so I think some of it is, do you have to get to that point? No. And I think that's why we need to kind of back the train up and do a better job of placing more respect and value and tools to help people walk through those emotions.
Yeah.
Now, my framework would build around the idea of I'm not supposed to be angry.
Mm-hmm.
I shouldn't be angry.
Yeah, because they're good or bad.
And that's not, no, that's not what it is.
Yeah.
And I would reframe it and call it something else. And in the end of the day, no, that's what it was. I didn't respect it enough, so it blew up on me. So,
Wow.
so that's some of the processes I think we can do a better job in some of our Christian frameworks around that.
Yeah.
And so, anyway, there's
So I have some questions, and we'll see how we go. One of those questions is I understand that there's a certain type of leadership that needs maybe, like all the leadership books are saying, to like, yes, you have emotions, but not
mm-hmm,
push them aside. But that's kind of what I was reading into it,
mm-hmm,
because you might not have the luxury of having those emotions at that time to make a clear decision,
mm.
right? Like I understand that that's the case.
That's a real life
That's a
situation.
real life situation. Like maybe in war, you don't want
Mm-hmm.
the
Oh,
panic,
yeah.
the fear to come out, like, because you need to be clear minded. You need to
Mm-hmm,
do that.
mm-hmm,
Trading, I don't know, stocks, whatever that is.
mm-hmm,
I understand that there are times and places to not do that. But when we bring leadership into the context of the church,
mm-hmm.
like, do you think that there is a way to combine emotions and being a good leader to become a better leader for
Mm-hmm.
our situation as far as leading people, like combining the two?
Yeah, I would say absolutely, and would like to say so. If I just keep it as far as my own experience, I would say I think my leadership is different in the last 6 years than it is the previous,
Wow. Okay.
and I would like to say it's better.
Yeah.
I feel more liberated,
Cool.
but it's very different.
Yeah.
And so I would say absolutely. I think you're absolutely right, though, that there are moments where, no, you need to step up
Yeah.
to the moment and take care of that stuff at some point,
Hmm.
for sure.
Yeah.
I mean, we don't want the Winston Churchills in the middle of World War II.
Crying.
I mean, we don't want that to deter, like, it's led by a reality that is very emotionally driven.
Yeah.
We do, especially in moments.
Yes. In
And
moments.
so I think some moments, specifically maybe crisis, tragedies,
Yeah.
hard leadership moments, I think you need to step up to the plate. But as a leader, make sure you're dealing with that.
Yeah.
Make sure you're dealing with make sure you're taking time to actually process those emotions. And I think I do believe there's actually intelligence in those emotions, but you also need to have the ability to look at those emotions and go, what intelligence is this teaching me?
Yeah. That's good.
So back to the shame and guilt thing, like guilt. If you talk to psychologists, they'll usually tell you that guilt is a better emotion out of those two,
Hmm.
because guilt is actually more thoughtful of somebody else. So when somebody does, or you do something to somebody, and you want to make reparation because you're actually thinking about them. Shame, you may do something to somebody, but now your reputation is tarnished because you did something that hurt somebody.
Yeah.
So now it's more narcissistic. And so even just going, oh, am I feeling shame right now? I'm actually more concerned about myself than I am about you.
Yes.
That's some invaluable intelligence.
Yeah.
That's like, oh, wow, there's some data right there that's actually telling me what's going on.
Yeah.
And then I got to learn how to move it over into, I'm actually going to work really hard to feel guilt in that moment.
Mm-hmm.
So I make reparations with you because of you, not because of my reputation.
Yeah.
And I'm embarrassed or humiliated of what I did. So I think that's where it gets interesting for me. And I think that's where we just need to approach as leaders. Okay, in moments of crisis and tragedy, what am I feeling? For me, I usually feel fear, and I usually feel a lack of courage.
Yes.
It's
Yeah.
like those two just kind of replace itself.
Yeah.
And so, like, okay, why am I feeling this?
Yeah.
Oh, I'm actually scared of what that person is going to say. Okay, I'm actually more concerned about something that actually not even this. So I think that the ways you can follow some of these emotions, and I think the more you do it, the quicker it comes.
Yeah.
Sometimes like, I don't know what I'm feeling. I'm freaked out. So I do think there needs to be an intersection, and I do think that's what we're seeing happen more in our day and age of leaders.
Yeah. Why do you feel like w- I won't classify it, but why do you feel like we as humans classify certain emotions as good and certain emotions as bad? Like, do you know what I mean? And
Mhm.
I think even as Christians, when we look at anger or sadness, we classify more that as like a bad emotion to not be in, not live in. And then but then when I read the Bible and I see like Jesus in the garden right before he knows he's going to step into
Mhm.
his time of death
Mhm.
and suffering, he literally is crying out to God in tears so deeply that it turns into blood.
Mhm.
And then he comes back and has asked his followers to pray with him, and they're asleep, and he gets I feel like angry about it, right? He's like, can't you just stay awake for a moment?
Yeah.
And so I see Jesus fully human in on this earth experiencing very deep sadness and maybe fear. I don't know, and then anger as well. And I'm like, okay, so over here it's saying that this is okay for
Mhm.
Jesus. He's perfect. So it's okay to experience those things and to sit in them.
Mhm.
And I don't know, I just don't know where it went from that being like, hey, a bad emotion to yeah,
Yeah, I don't know who came up with good emotions and bad emotions.
yeah,
So I think an answer to that would be let's not use that as a measuring stick.
yeah.
Maybe the measuring stick is a range of easy
Hmm.
and challenging.
Okay. I like that.
Because joy is easy. I
Yeah,
mean, no one it's so there's no resistance. It's
yeah,
just there. But obviously you got anger and you got sadness. Those are more challenges. So we can just change the framework of it. So when someone has, dealing with a quote used to be bad emotion, like
yes.
no, this is just a challenging
It's just a
emotion.
challenging.
This is just an emotion that you as a human were designed to experience and emulate and emit. So let's get rid of the framework of good and bad.
Yeah,
Let's put something else in place, because then that could help go, okay, I'm going to, there's intensity to the emotion. Like joy is an intense emotion,
yeah,
and anger is an intense emotion. Peace is an intense experience, and fear is really intense. So I think we can look at more gradient,
yeah,
look at it from more of a gradient perspective, not good or bad. And I think if we can change the framework around it, then maybe we can interact with it better
mm,
and help people to interact with it.
yeah,
And then because we're in the role of pastoring and we're interacting with lots of people, when someone says, I'm having bad emotions, like, no, it's not a bad emotion. You're just experiencing a normal human emotion.
yeah,
So it needs to be normalized. So I don't know who started the good bad,
yeah.
but we could start there. We
Yeah,
start
I
there.
love that. And then also what's interesting to me is that we're okay to feel those emotions when it comes to even the artwork we watch or the movies we watch. Like I love, a good Superman movie, like where you experience and they make it the villain where you're like, this
Mhm.
guy, and then you have the Superman that comes in and saves the day. And it's like we are so okay with feeling emotions through art, but then when it comes to our own life, we get triggered or scared to feel those range of emotions, but
Mhm.
that's what makes a great story. I mean, that's
Mhm.
our journey. And
Mhm.
and I mean, what a boring story to hear someone just be happy all the time. If you want to see that, you can just go on Instagram, right? Because we just post all of the
Hmm.
happy thoughts and reels. But I think for me, it's like that's what makes us human is
Hmm.
being able to ebbs and flows and be
Hmm.
able to embrace that in our own life
Hmm.
and find the beauty in that and
Hmm.
not just classify it as, oh man, that was a really rough time in my life.
Hmm.
Yeah, maybe it was, but also that's really defining who you are and it's a
Hmm.
cool part of your story as well.
Yeah.
So,
I think, I mean, I have friends in my life that can't handle the depth of emotion that I have,
mm,
and that's fine.
wow.
So I think you have to at some point go, this person really can't fully handle what's really going on,
Yeah.
and I'm okay with that.
Wow.
But if all your friends are that,
Yeah.
then that's going to be a tough dynamic. And then you're going to be really isolated and alone. So I
Mhm.
do think you need to have a variety of relationships that hit different parts of you,
Mhm.
and you are that for other people as well.
Yeah,
So I can
that's
sit in a
good.
room with someone that is going through lots of emotions easier than some of the people I know. They're like, I can't do this. I can't sit in this room, and it's just such a
So
swirl.
swirl.
They can't do it, and
Yeah.
it's very challenging. And that is just the reality. And so I think for me, I think some people. So when you ask like, how come culturally, I'm like, yeah, just everybody's different.
Yeah.
Whether that's healthy or not healthy, that's a whole nother nuance in it. But for me personally, like we were talking the other day in our chat together, and I was saying I have certain people that I call, and when I just need to like kind of vomit,
Yeah.
and and there's space for that, but I can't do that with these
With
three
it.
people. No, it would freak them out.
Yeah. Yeah.
They would, there so many things would happen there, and so I think some of it's making sure you have a variety relationship
That's good.
that can handle you,
Yeah.
and then you also gauge it too, like hey, I'm not gonna vomit here, or I'm not gonna show what the things I'm wrestling with and trying to figure out how to. I'm not. That's just not that relationship.
Yeah.
And so,
Interesting.
yeah.
Okay. Anything else you feel like we're supposed
No,
to touch?
I think no. I think that's good.
I think it's good.
Hmm.
Yeah, I think that's a good thing. I think I mean, I know this, we talked a lot about leaders, but I just feel like that's a good thing to address because it's been something that's just been really challenging for me to
Hmm.
try to go through and I know I'm a little bit more guarded than most when it comes to my empathy because we had a guy come in and speak to our team. It was a while back, and he was talking about how you have to be careful with your empathy and not give it to everyone. And I got like you want to talk about that
Yeah.
anger raising up, like I was like kind of upset, and he came up to me afterwards and was like, I see that you're kind of frustrated. I'm like, yeah, but I'm an artist, and he said, well, yeah, artists are whole different creatures and they are moved by empathy. And I was like, oh, that's interesting because I'm having to figure out and navigate the two.
Hmm.
And I think it could be a beautiful blend. It's just a different process. And
Hmm.
do you have, to finish this out, would you have any resources that you think that you could give to anybody that's like, hey, I'd love to figure it out even emotionally or as a leader? Do you have anything you've read or advice or anything you want to finish out with?
Yeah. I mean, the book. I believe it's called Emotional Intelligence. I read it quite a few years ago, and what I remember, what I read, I really it just placed a value on it. So that's a book. I forget the author's name. I don't have it in front of me, but that would be one book
Okay.
that I can think of. There's a great book, a Christian book, that is called Emotionally Healthy Spirituality.
Wow. Okay.
It's by Pete Scazzaro, and there's a whole branch of workshops and workbooks coming out of that book. That's a really great book. The first half was really helpful for me. The second half was really good, but it got it more, a little bit more pragmatic and dogmatic. The first half gave a lot of emphasis on our spirituality actually involves our emotions,
Wow.
and there's a healthy way to do it. So that those two books would be really good.
Okay.
I think for people listening to, what's interesting is in my interaction with people, I know that when people get to like mid 30s, this is not like a cookie cutter scenario,
Yeah.
but it's common. When they get to like their mid 30s and start approaching their 40s, there is a you're confronted with, whether you realize it or not, you're confronted with you've lived half your life,
Mm-hmm.
the average lifespan. Some people
Okay.
obviously live longer, but you are approaching this point in life. You're approaching a new mindset, and that is, I don't have as much time ahead of me as I have behind me.
Yeah.
You're just getting closer to that reality. I remember with my 42nd birthday, I'm like, I have I might have less time in front of me than I have behind me. Like
Yeah.
you just don't think about that in your
No, you
20s.
don't.
As a kid, you
Yeah,
don't think
you're
about it.
invincible. Yeah.
20s and 30, but when you start getting close to your 40s, I think what that does, that existential moment, does reveal the status of your emotions, your mind, your body, your life. Why am I? You just naturally go into that, whether you choose to or not. You just move into
It just
that.
does that. Yeah.
And so I think what's helpful for people is there's an operating system that was shaped as a child, was shaped through experiences. And as you got older, more things. And at least the people I interact with, which is a lot of people, I notice, hey, when you get to this age, think about what's the operating system that you need now to move forward.
That's good.
So I wonder if some of it is some people hit that mid stage in life, the operating system starting to show it's what's not strong enough.
Mm-hmm.
It's not holding up you as much as it used to.
Yeah.
It's not computing the way it needs to. You're not able to process things. You're maybe a little more confused. And so I think for me, when I went through my breakdown, what I feel like what God told me, I'm giving you a new operating system. So I held on to that one statement. Okay, I am losing one. It's obviously collapsed. It's
Yes.
failed, a complete system failure. And I did my best to keep it, and it just failed. And so over the course of the next year, 2, 3 years, I got a new operating system. And what God told me, he said, I'm giving you a new operating system. The one you had got you to this point in life, but the one I'm giving you will be for the second half of your life.
That's cool.
So for me, it was hope. Like, okay, so I'm getting a new operating system. So I think for people that are maybe at the old operating system and they're maybe running up against some dynamics, like,
Yeah.
okay, have hope that there is another way to do life internally and externally waiting for you.
Wow. Okay.
But it's important to go through that. And so some people call it a midlife crisis. I don't know if that's what it is,
Yeah.
but I think it's an existential confrontation.
Okay.
So that's
Dang.
something to think about. For some people, I was just with a leader in another country we were just with, and they're kind of in that space right now. They're in their early 40s, going, I'm like, yeah, okay, you're going to be fine. Just keep moving forward because you're actually stepping into really the most beautiful part of your life.
Yeah.
Because you're not young anymore.
Yeah.
You've got maturity.
Mm-hmm.
You've got some experience, and you still have some youthfulness.
Yeah.
So you are actually in a prime spot, but learning to move into a new operating system is part of that journey. So those books are helpful. And then for me, I had a therapist.
Yeah.
That was crucial. You know, I come from a very highly spiritual background. So we pray for you. Here's the scripture. It's very much that mode. And when I went my breakdown, I was like, I don't want any of that.
Yeah. That's real.
As much as I love it, I need someone to actually rebuild the internal parts of me.
Yeah.
So I was like, I mean, you can pray all you want. I have a place and value for that. But I had gotten to a point like, that ain't working for him anymore.
Yeah. I need some facts.
I need some, yes. And so that's what I did.
Yeah.
So I submitted myself to someone and they walked me through, and that person is still involved in my life to some capacity as well.
That's cool.
So
I love that.
there's hope. I don't want to make sure we end this talk with like, oh yeah, have fun with those emotions. No, there's hope, but you do need to understand it's a lot of work
Yeah.
and it's worth it. And so I'm now obviously approaching 50, and I'm more excited about the rest of my life than I've been excited about the previous parts of my life. And so I think that's the beautiful side of this conversation.
I feel exposed because I turned 40 this year, and I feel like you just said that you're not young anymore. I'm like, ow.
You haven't even started, Shayna.
I know. Anyways.
This whole idea of we hit this peak and we start dropping, it's like, no, we're actually designed to keep going.
Yeah.
So you haven't even started.
Okay. Thanks.
You haven't even scratched the surface.
All right. All right. I like
haven't.
that. I know. I like that. I heard
You believe it in your head, but do you believe it in your soul?
No, I heard someone say that this is actually one of the best times to be alive if you are a human, because we live longer. We have a better quality of life. All of these things, even though we see like all the things that happen and the wars and all the conflicts and everything, but it actually, as humanity as a whole, this is one of the best times to live.
Yep.
Yeah. So I have to live off that.
Good. I'm glad.
All right. That was amazing. Great talk.
Thanks for listening today.
Yes.
Subscribe, click
Comment.
on the button.
I like